Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sanjay Agnihotri. I am the publisher of Canadian Immigrant magazine. Welcome to the Canadian Immigrant web conference series in partnership with ACCESS Employment and sponsored today by Osgoode Professional Development. This industry-specific web conference for internationally educated lawyers and legal professionals. And please note, this will be recorded and posted on our website to watch for those who cannot attend in person. Thank you to our sponsors who support Canadian Immigrant, allow us to run these free events and webinars for newcomers across the country. Before we start, we'd like to share and show a brief message from one of our sponsors to Canadian Immigrant, Western Union. Please see video.
Sorry, just 1 second. Here we go.
Hi, Jasmine. It's your brother here. I'm sending a little money home to help that dream of yours become a reality.
When you send money, you send more than money. Western Union.
Terrific. I am thrilled to introduce our first of two keynote speakers from Osgoode Professional Development. Michael is the program lawyer, professional graduate, and international programs at Osgoode Professional Development. He does program and curricular development and academic and career advising for graduate law students. If you have any questions for Michael, please feel free to type them in the chat by clicking on the Q&A button, or you can simply email us at info@canadianimmigrant.ca. Once again, that's info@canadianimmigrant.ca. We are thrilled to have Michael. Michael, please take it away.
Thanks, Sanjay. It's such a pleasure to be speaking with you all today. Again, my name is Michael Tam, and as Sanjay mentioned, I am an academic and career counselor for internationally trained lawyers who are graduate students with us here at Osgoode PD. Having gone through sort of the accreditation and licensing process myself, I know how difficult it is as an internationally trained lawyer to make it in the Canadian legal market. And so to that end, I've made this presentation in hopes to help all of you through that process. And then Megan will join me later in the latter half of this conference to talk about that entire process and what it'll take for you to get through it all. So let me just share my presentation. So again, I'm going to be focused on talking about launching your legal career in the Canadian marketplace. The first things I do want everyone to be mindful of is that it might require a shift in mindset for you. I think a lot of you are going to, hear gossip or be talking amongst yourself, being worried that there's prejudice against internationally trained lawyers. And I just want you to remember that there are a bunch of statements that people think that aren't necessarily true. The first is, I'm not as competitive as a Canadian law student. And I wholeheartedly believe that that is false. What is different is that you're just less familiar with the process. Law students here in Canada have more time to integrate into the community, to figure out what the timelines for things are, to figure out how recruiters and employers are hiring for people. And so what you need to do as an internationally trained lawyer is just learn about the process. So attending things like this, attending other events geared towards internationally trained lawyers or new immigrant lawyers, I think is the best way to get informed so that you are aware about the process so that you can participate as fully as Canadian law students can. It's also a false narrative that you need to have Canadian experience exclusively to be competitive. One of the things that I tell lawyers everywhere in the world is that the laws might be different, but the skills and the actual lawyering that you do are essentially the same. I tell, litigators who have litigated abroad that, being yelled at by a judge or a magistrate feels the same no matter where in the world you are. Having a client need something from you right away feels exactly the same no matter where in the world you are. And yes, the interpretation of the laws might be different. The forms and documents might be different. Even the process might be slightly different. But the fact that you have the experience from abroad does not mean it's less compelling to a Canadian employer. What it does mean, however, is that you need to translate that experience in a way that the Canadian employer will understand and really know how to value the amazing experiences that you do come with. Other things that you do need to keep in mind that it is going to be true that you have to advocate for yourself. One of the things that you need to remember is nobody in the legal profession might be aware of you yet. You might not have talked to anyone yet. And what that means is you get a blank slate to start the entire impression that whoever you're talking to has of you. And so you need to remember that as a lawyer, you have excellent written and oral advocacy skills. You need to direct those skills to yourself, to advocate for yourself, to explain why your education is amazing, why your experience is amazing. And you also need excellent written advocacy on your application materials, on your cover letters, to potential employers as to why you would make such a wonderful candidate. And it is true that there will be some cultural differences. Some of you might be coming from jurisdictions where you might be a little bit more deferential to those who are seen as superior to you. You might also come from jurisdictions where, being trying to represent your experience might come off as boastful or egotistical. And one of the things that you need to remember is, again, that advocate for yourself piece. If you're not going to be confident and impress upon people how amazing the experience you have is, no one's going to understand that. So you need to make sure that you do sort of have a bit of a shift and understand how people here communicate so that you can make sure they understand the full value that you're coming with. One of the things that I do need all of you to remember is everyone will want to help. So it's not just people like Megan and myself and Canadian Immigrant who wants to help you. Everyone will want to help you because they might have a piece of advice. They might have connections that you can connect with. But the thing that they don't know is how they can help you. And so it's really important to do your research to figure out how, a different person or a different resource could potentially help you in your path, and really direct the conversation you have, direct the interactions you have towards those end goals, and to know what you can and can't ask of the person you're connecting with. You cannot be passive in your own career. I want to make sure that you understand that, no one else is going to build your network for you. No one is going to apply for the jobs for you. And so you cannot be passive and wait for these things to happen. You need to make them happen yourself. And there will be some differences. I know a lot of you might be coming from jurisdictions where application materials, you don't even send in a resume, or your resume is very bare bones, because you're expected to explain all of that in an interview, or maybe there is no formal recruitment process because it's all done through networking, or all done through who you know and the connections you make. And so learning the recruitment timelines, the different formats of job application materials, and understanding the importance of networking within the Canadian legal environment, and all of the sort of interpersonal intricacies of engaging with different people is going to be something that does require a bit of a cultural shift. Be confident, however. I want you to all remember as lawyers, you have a base amount of skill, you have clear intellect, you have competence. And so make sure that comes through with every interaction. Don't be apologetic. Don't sell yourself short. Know that you have, the intelligence and the the understanding of the law, the competence of what you're doing. And again, it might be from a different jurisdiction, but it doesn't mean it's less valuable. You need to remember that every application you send out for jobs needs to convince the employer to hire you, right? Again, to that be an advocate for yourself point. Can you convince me on paper to interview? Can you convince me in the interview to hire you? The education and experience you have does not speak for itself. So we might not have the context of understanding how amazing or how well ranked your school is within your country. We might not know how impressive some of the internships you got during your schooling are, because we don't know, the Queen's Counsel you might have interned with, or the rankings of the law firms that you might have had experience in. And so again, you're the one who needs to convey that to us, that you graduated from one of the top schools in your country, that you were one of the top graduates in your graduating class, and have that actually be explicitly made clear on a resume or on a cover letter. Because employers will not have the time to look up the different rankings, look up the impressiveness of your school, the caliber of the education you come with. So make sure it's clear on paper and in your interactions just how impressive some of that stuff is. Again, no one's going to advocate for you but you. We can certainly, by attending things like this, build up your confidence, but ultimately it's up to you to write these application materials, to engage with the legal profession, and to, impress people in these interviews. And so hopefully we can give you some of the skills and some of the confidence, but remember, you've got to do it for yourself, and you've got to believe that you can do it for yourself. You need to remember how unique you are. Not everyone has the experiences you've had. And while every lawyer and every law student can do legal research, can draft a document if I have a precedent, can do analysis of laws and regulations and legislation, not everyone might have done the unique research that you've had the opportunity to do, to work on the weird legal issues that you might have come across in your various jobs, or to deal with the types of clients or government bodies that you've had. And so one of the things going forward in my next couple of slides is not to be vague about your experience. I find that when I'm looking at internationally trained lawyer applications, a lot of times, people just say very generic things like can draft a document, can do legal research. And my first critique of that is always, well, so can every law student ever. And so make sure you give me the context for how impressive some of the research and drafting you've done is. Can you draft, a multi-million-dollar agreement? Have you worked on a 1 or 2 year long trial? Have you done research that helped a senior partner affect their litigation strategy in some way? Those are experiences that make you unique, and those are experiences that will impress other lawyers who are reading your application. And it's really important that that gets conveyed across your application materials when you're looking for jobs. So in terms of the job hunting process, it's really important to know where you are in the process. And so for those of you who are unsure or not 100% sure where you are in the process, make sure you stay on to listen to Megan Thomas's presentation, because she will walk you through the entire accreditation and licensing process. But it's really important for you to know, because employers don't always understand the accreditation and licensing process. They just need you to be ready for the job that they have posted. And so on your application materials, it needs to be clear that you are at the stage necessary for the job that you're applying to. And there's lots of different terms out there, the second year summer student, the on-campus interviews, articling, the law law practice program placements. There's lots of different jobs out there, and all of them require you to be at different stages in your accreditation and licensing process. So just as a summary, a second-year summer student or any of those summer student jobs require you to be at least 1 or 2 years out from being ready to be licensed as a licensing candidate. An on-campus interview is a specific type of interview for these applications for these summer position roles. Articling is the training that you are expected to have as a part of being a licensing candidate with a specific province. And the law practice placement is also the experiential component of licensing if you decide to go through the law practice program instead of doing articling. Lots of internationally trained lawyers also talk to me about, should I be applying for legal assistant jobs, law clerks, paralegal, should I, be an intern? Should I volunteer somewhere? And Canadian experience can certainly help your application, but again, be mindful of the types of jobs that you are and aren't eligible for. So for example, a law clerk is a very specific designation, requires you to be certified. Paralegals are a licensed profession with the Law Society as well. And so do you have the requisite degrees and the registration with the Law Society to apply to be a paralegal? So very important to know, again, where are you in the process of, getting accredited or getting licensed? And also really important to convey that to a potential employer. I am eligible to be a licensing candidate or an articling student as of X date, and making that very apparent either on your resume and cover letter. Often people, especially people who are, on their phones all the time, they're very used to looking for things online. And I get asked all the time, where do I look for jobs? Is there one place where all of the jobs are posted? No, unfortunately, there's never one place where every job ever available is listed. And it does take some work. You need to look around. You need to look at maybe some of the major firms and government organizations. They use a very specific platform for some of their summer and articling student jobs. Other organizations might have their own internal portal. Some lawyers are still very old school and want physical copies to be sent in or faxed in. So it really just depends. Certainly there are law firms that are making use of newer technologies, and so platforms like LinkedIn and other job posting places you'll be able to find. But the caveat to finding these online job postings is that if you can find it online, so can everyone else, and hundreds of people will apply for those jobs. And it's extra difficult to make sure you stand out when a posting is publicly accessible. But make sure you do your research the firms, research how the firms you are interested in might be doing their recruitment, and making sure that you follow those processes and procedures. Networking is key, however. Being able to point out the connections you've made to a specific employer, the connections you've had from your previous experience to what they do, the actual connections you've made to the students at that firm or lawyers at that firm or partners at that firm will help your application stand out. And so unfortunately, networking is key. And in fact, it's key to accessing, the hundreds of jobs that aren't going to be posted online because you just happen to be the right person they meet at the right time when they have a need, and therefore they don't have to go through the process of posting it somewhere and waiting for hundreds of applications to come in and then interviewing those people and finally selecting someone. So in terms of your application materials, again, do your research the firm, figure out the connections you have with the various firms, and make sure you allow for preparation time. Students, internationally trained lawyers always want one perfect resume and cover letter that can apply to everything, and that really just doesn't work. Firms will be able to tell if you have a generic templated resume and cover letter. They'll be able to tell if you can remove one sentence or one paragraph of your cover letter and switch it out for another employer. Those things are very apparent, and it makes the employer feel like, oh, they haven't thought about, why they're a good fit for me. They're just probably applying to hundreds of different firms. So make sure that you do take the time and understand how much time it's going to take to tailor your application materials when you're applying to different jobs at different levels, at different firms, whether it's public or private sector. All of those applications should be as unique as possible and should convey to whoever is reading it that you're the only one that they're considering, and you're their employer, them as an employer is the only place that you could potentially want to work. Always make sure to save any postings you find online, because unlike a lot of other sectors, law firms, you never know, they might be looking at applications as the posting is up, and they might not leave it up until the final deadline, which goes to my next point of don't wait until the due date to submit your applications, because the posting might be down and they might have already found someone before then. So apply as early as possible is always my recommendation, and always save the posting. There is specifics on format, font, and length, so let me get into that. In terms of formatting, your resume should be 2 pages. It should have a header with all of your contact information. And unlike a lot of other Canadian resumes, you don't need a skills or an objectives or a summary section right at the beginning. Legal employers are expecting you to get right into your education and your qualifications, get right into your work experience on that first page. But overall, it should be 2 pages. And again, header, go right into your education, your qualifications. So especially in the qualification section, maybe you can put in where you are in the accreditation or licensing process, whether or not you are admitted to the bar in another jurisdiction and how long ago that was. And then really be clear with the work experience you've had. And again, to my earlier points, give the context of how impressive some of the work you have done is. I would avoid using multiple lists. So often I see things like, oh, I've drafted X document, X document, X agreement, this piece of paper. And those lists end up being very dense and hard to get through and ultimately not very memorable. So make sure you try to limit each bullet point to 1 point, 1 skill, 1 amazing thing that you've done. It keeps it easy to read, and it also keeps it focused on exactly kind of the skills that you want me to know that you've had. I would also make sure that you have multiple versions of resumes, again, for different sectors, different law firms. They might be impressed by different aspects of your experience. So the latter pages can be all the other things that you put in, the extracurriculars, the volunteer, the specific interests that you have that are unique to you. And again, make sure there's a lot of white space. One of the things you can see from sort of the slide is there's a lot of clear white space. The bullet points aren't too dense, and it makes it easier to read for somebody who is looking at it. In terms of specificity with language, and again, that's just about avoiding vague language. Don't just say things like, I can draft these 20 documents. I can do legal research, because everyone else who's applying for these jobs can also do that. So make sure it's clear, what kind of research you've done on what kind of project and what was the result. Have you drafted really complicated, high value, high worth transactions? Have you dealt with risk and liability on an international scale? Making sure that those things are conveyed in each bullet point, as opposed to, again, just drafted these documents, did legal research, assisted the senior lawyer, which again, any law student can potentially do. In terms of specificity with language, there's lots of thesauruses out there. There's lots of websites out there that can help you. But these are just some of the words that you might be able to utilize instead of just repeating the same thing over and over and over, right? in terms of communicating with different types of people, there's writing, there's negotiating, presenting, with client service. It's not just, listening to clients, it's addressing client concerns, managing their expectations, protecting client confidentiality. So you'll be able to go online to find lots of lists like this to speak to skills that you want to be talking about, but so that you're not being overly repetitive and redundant with the skills you're trying to emphasize in your bullet points. In terms of the cover letter, your cover letter should be a one-page cover letter. It should look like a business letter. So again, your header should be at the very top. There should be an address, a salutation, sort of, a subject line about what you're applying for, what the job posting was, and then it should go into, a 2 to 4 body paragraph letter, and finish off with sort of your signature. Cover letters are really important to really create a narrative about who you are, why you're passionate about this job, what skills you're bringing to the table, what knowledge you have about what they do, and also a way to bring in all that work that hopefully you've done in researching and networking to the page where you can talk about what connections you've made to the firm, why you know that the firm is the right place for you. So instead of treating it like just a reiteration of your resume, which it really shouldn't be because you have very few pages to impress employers, treat it like you're writing an essay is what I always suggest, where your thesis is hire me. And so the paragraphs that you write should be your proofs as to why you should be hired by this firm. And you can see how if you're writing it in that way, you can't just have a template resume because the reasons you might want to be employed by one firm might be slightly different from the reasons that you want to be employed by another firm. And so being able to pinpoint exactly the top 2 or 3 reasons you want to be employed by X firm is it's going to form sort of the paragraphs in your cover letter. And here again, avoid vague language and statements that you can't prove. Often I'll read things like, I'm an excellent team player and I have excellent communication skills, which is why I should be hired. And my first thought when I read something like that is, well, can you prove that? Do you have any experience in that? Can you point to an experience that actually proves some of those things that you're saying? So making it clear that you not only have the skills, but you have the proof to back it up to prove why you should be hired. So the typical cover letter I've seen and all employers have seen over and over again are, hi, I'm an Ncaa student. I'm looking to learn and grow at the best firm. And then there's a paragraph about your experience. There's a paragraph of your skills. And then you say, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. But because they're seeing 200-300 versions of the same cover letter, it gets a little bit formulaic, and it's very easy also to tell if someone has given it more thought and has actual connections to the firm themselves. And so like I was mentioning, maybe you rethink the structure and write it like a research paper. And it's a chance to tell sort of even in your introduction, not just, hi, I'm Michael Tam. I'm an internationally trained lawyer. I'm doing my NCAs. I'm going to be called and I'd like to work for your firm. But maybe a chance to introduce how you've always been passionate about this area of law. And throughout all of your different schools and experiences, that has weaved its way through the subjects you've chosen and the work experiences you've had, and makes a connection to why you're actually interested in this firm. And an introduction like that can mirror the structure of introducing who you are, the school, and where you are in the process, but it is a narrative that tells me a little bit more about you. In terms of the actual paragraphs about your skills and experiences, it needs to be curated in a way that shows why you know the skills you have are relevant to this area of law, why they're important for this job, and why this firm now. So again, it can't just be a reiteration of things that you've put in your resume. It needs to be more of a story and a well thought out story as to how the experiences you have really do relate to maybe being a summer student at this corporate firm or being an articling student at this litigation firm, because those skills might be slightly different, and they might be shown in your previous experiences from abroad in different ways. And again, you need to prove it, right? So do you know that these skills are necessary for this job? Do you know that the passion you have is going to help you in this job? And how have you learned that? Well, maybe it's because you know the lawyers you've talked to from that firm are also equally passionate about these things, or that you have worked in it yourself before and you know that these are crucial to client satisfaction. And being able to integrate those kind of skills and experiences and knowledge into a cover letter makes it resonate much better with a potential employer. Refer every paragraph you have back to the job. And so just like when you're writing a research paper or a thesis, you're tying your proof back to the thesis. So refer the paragraph back to why you deserve this job, or why this firm, or why this role. And hopefully through working on your application materials, you are successful and you end up getting a job interview. Make sure you go through your application in detail before these interviews and have something to say about every part of your application. Have a minute or two to say about every bullet point, every experience, every skill, every interest that you have, so that if one of the questions in the interview is just, oh, can you tell me about that? You're not caught off guard and you do have something to say about it. Another thing about especially private sector interviews is there's what's called behavioral-based interview questions. And behavioral-based interview questions get to how you might problem solve something. And so behavioral-based interview questions can be posed one of two ways. The first might be, tell me a time when you've, and so it's asking you about your specific experience dealing with this behavioral issue and how you problem solve that. The other way it might be asked is as a hypothetical. They might pose that you are already working for my firm and this situation comes up. How would you deal with that? The way to answer behavioral-based questions, so again, they get at problem solving. And it might be problem solving, a time when you've been a leader, problem solving, maybe a time when you've been sort of a member of a group, problem solving an interpersonal conflict you might have had, problem solving mistakes you might have made. And so, the question might be, tell me a time when you've made a mistake. Or hypothetically, it would be, oh, you as a student recognize that you've made a mistake on a research memo that you've submitted to me, your supervisor. What would you do in that situation? And to answer behavioral-based questions, there's a very simple method. It's called the STAR approach, where you identify the situation that you're being asked to deal with. You identify the specific task that you have to solve. And the A is the actions that you will take to solve that. And the R is the result of what those actions will hopefully result in. And so in answering a question like, tell me a time when you've made a mistake, they're not trying to see when you've failed or when you've made a mistake. They're really trying to get at, how would you problem solve making a mistake so that it's not the end, so that the consequences and the results end up being positive. So the most important part of answering these behavioral-based questions is the A part of the STAR, all of the different actions you would take to solve the problem that's before you. So make sure you have lots of ways you might solve a problem, whether that's your communication skills, escalating a problem, diffusing a problem, and all of the different strategies you would utilize to get to the result that you're hoping for. Another thing to be mindful of is job interviews vary from private sector to public sector. So private sector interviews tend to be more conversational. They tend to be more about what your experiences are, what you're passionate about, getting to know you, and much more sort of interactive. Public sector interviews are much more structured and they're more substantive in nature. So you will actually have to study the laws and cases that the public sector entity deals with, so that you're ready to answer these substantive questions. It's almost like an oral exam, and in some ways, sometimes there's actually a written component to it, or you have to give a presentation. So how you prepare for public and private sector interviews will also be different. And one of my last biggest pieces of advice in preparing for job interviews is to practice answers out loud. We as lawyers are really good about thinking and strategizing and having, different ways we might deal with something, but not all of us are equally eloquent when we have to say something out loud. Not all of us are comfortable talking about our own experiences and skills in a way that's designed to impress someone. And so make sure, especially since we're all online these days and have, access to webcams and things like that, record yourself, practice your answers out loud so that they become natural, and so that there's a flow to them, and so that you also recognize when you feel comfortable answering something versus when you're nervous. And does your voice change when you're nervous? Do you look off to the side when you're nervous? Are you, do you have any like things that you fidget with when you're not 100% sure about your answer? And those are all things that you can easily and quickly correct, especially if you're recording yourself out loud. So that was a quick and easy way into job hunting and accessing your legal career path. I wish you all the best of luck. You can always, if you're interested in any of the programs that we offer, or have any questions for our team, you can always contact us at recruitment-opd@osgoode.yorku.ca. And I'm leaving a little bit of time for questions. So are there any questions from our participants?
Thank you, Michael. That was fantastic. And I can take it away with Q&A.
Sure.
Some across the chat, social, and as well as info CanadianImmigrant.ca. So first question is, can you transfer credits from a college paralegal diploma to the accreditation process for Ncaa?
So the Ncaa deals with their own processes. So I'm not a representative of them. I can't speak on their behalf. But one of the things that they will look at is all of your education and all of your substantive common law experience. And they will factor that into an assessment. Whether or not your subjects that you've taken previously meet their competencies will really depend on actually where you studied, how recently it was, and how much it mirrors the competencies that they're assessing you for. Megan will touch on a little bit of that, but again, it's always best to reach out to the regulatory body themselves.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you. Another question is, what are some alternative career options while waiting for foreign credential recognition?
Yeah, that's a complicated question because unlike a lot of different jurisdictions, there's lots of different types of jobs out there. And unlike a lot of jurisdictions, there's not one structured way to access all of those jobs. And so again, to my point earlier about knowing where you are in the process, knowing where you are in the process, what rights of appearance you might have will inform the types of jobs you apply for, whether that's, legal assistant jobs, volunteering jobs, contract management jobs, specialist jobs. The best and most helpful solution I would have in trying to figure that out is to just talk to more internationally trained lawyers. You'll be surprised at all of the different work experiences that people have while they're getting accredited before they're licensed. And it will help inform you as to what options are out there, because again, there's no one title, no one job that exists for all the people who are in different stages of the process.
Okay, we have time for two more. Michael,
Sure.
If not specifically asked by you, do you recommend always submitting a cover letter?
That's a great question. I would say it's always helpful to have a cover letter because, again, it just gives you more of an opportunity to explain what your fit is to a job and why you know you're the right person for what they're looking for. However, if it's a connection you've already made, if it's somebody you've already talked to and they're just asking for a resume, then just give them your resume, because hopefully in the interaction you've already conveyed to them all the things that you would have said in a cover letter.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And if an organization doesn't want the cover letter, they'll just move forward right to the resume.
Exactly.
Those that need it have the ability to at least see what you put on paper. So completely agree. The last one, Michael, is a little bit of a mouthful. So if you repeat it, please let me know, but it's long-winded, but I completely understand the essence of this. Regarding curating cover letter for each employer, I asked myself, what would I want to be hired for this? Why would I want to be hired for this specific firm? What's different about this specific employer that I need to include in the letter? But I'm applying to various firms and my profile isn't changing. So for example, I can't connect my experience to the firm without being generic. And an example is, I want to practice family or criminal law. So I'm applying to family and criminal law practices. Can you please tell in what manner we could modify the cover letter for a job?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question, but lawyering is lawyering regardless of the area of law. And so I get the impulse to want to be generic, but remember, different areas of law deal with different types of people and different types of issues, which also mean you need different types of skills. So specifically for, let's say, somebody who is interested in litigation like family or criminal, dealing with civil litigation, dealing with insurance companies, people who've been injured, people who are claiming against other people, there are differences in their emotional state that you need to manage. There are differences in the delicacy with which you deal with all of the different people who are a part of these legal issues. And so utilizing the cover letter to explain, understanding how difficult, a personal injury case might be, how much is at stake in terms of their livelihood, and being able to convey that through mirrored experiences that you've had in the past or the passion you have for serving your community is going to be very different from, say, a criminal cover letter where you're talking about criminal justice, where you're talking about access to justice, or maybe about getting justice for people who can't otherwise seek it from the institutions that they're a part of. And so you need to dig a little deeper than just, I have the skills and I want to learn, but you need to figure out, why am I actually so passionate about these areas of law? Because that's what's going to resonate with those employers and those clients and how you can serve them.
Wonderful. Michael, thank you very much for your time. On behalf of Canadian Immigrant, we really appreciate you being here. And we're not done yet. So next up to join us on the Canadian Immigrant web conference series for internationally trained lawyers and legal professionals, in partnership with ACCESS Employment, and of course, sponsored today by Osgoode Professional Development, is Megan Thomas. Megan is the Director, Professional Graduate and International Programs at Osgoode Professional Development, and oversees the Professional LLM, which provides graduate legal education designed for experienced lawyers and professionals, and complementary non-credit programs designed for internationally trained lawyers. Once again, if you have any questions for Megan, we ask that you click on the chat button and include it there for the Q&A at the end, or simply email us, like many of you have, at info@canadianimmigrant.ca. Once again, that's info@canadianimmigrant.ca. Megan, thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's really wonderful to be with all of you this afternoon. And Michael has set us up really well, I think, for this session, because what I'm going to be talking about is education or training options that internationally trained lawyers might consider pursuing. And I guess what informs the presentation today is that very often internationally trained lawyers are looking to pursue education for career development reasons. They may be wanting to transition skills into the Canadian market. They may be wanting to pursue a different field than what they've done previously, and so on. So I do want to say, of course, some of you on the session today may be thinking about pursuing further education for personal reasons or because of academic interests, but I'll be focusing mostly on thinking about educational options from that career perspective. And so hopefully Michael's presentation has given you some food for thought in terms of how you would think about your own skills and what you might want to do in the Canadian market, because that will help you kind of sort through the information that I'm going to share with you next. Okay, let's pull this up. So as I said, I'm going to talk about education options. There's a lot out there, and I've really tried to distill this down to key information for today so that I can give you sort of the full landscape, but also leave some time for questions, because I know there typically are questions. So I'm going to start with thinking about outcomes that are available to you after pursuing some kind of educational program. And I should say, of course, as Michael has set up, many internationally trained lawyers come to Canada and they don't do education options. They simply go into the job market and they work for a period of time, and sometimes they continue on for the remaining of their working career that way. Other times they might pursue education down the road. So I don't want to give you the impression that it's necessary that you automatically do some kind of education when you come to Canada, or if you're new here. There would be options for you to be working without doing that. But of course, many people do think that education would be helpful, and it can be for a number of different reasons. We're going to then, once we think about the outcome you might have in mind in terms of the type of work that you would want to be doing, we'll look at the education pathways that would be available for each of those outcomes. And we'll finish off with some practical considerations. So, you know, in some cases you might be limited by budget or time, or there might be different educational options that support the same outcome. And I'll give you some factors to consider in terms of thinking about some of those practical things that might influence your decision. So first of all, we want to focus on what is it you'd like to do? Are you looking to become accredited to practice? Do you want to work in a non-practicing role? Are you looking for a more entry-level job or an unrelated to law job? Or you need to do something in the meantime while you make some money and make a longer-term plan? All of these are options that are available, and we see people pursuing all of these different pathways. And in some cases, people have a shorter term and a longer term plan that might be different. So let me give you a couple of examples that might help inform your thinking as we go along. So we see many people coming to Canada who are lawyers from other jurisdictions, and they already know for sure they love being a lawyer, really passionate about the law, definitely want to become practicing lawyers here. And so sometimes those folks are really zeroed in on that pathway. They get into the accreditation process and pursue that right away. However, there might be other situations where, let's say, someone trained as a lawyer, perhaps they've been working for a while and they're considering other options. So let's say, for example, someone who has worked as an in-house counsel might be thinking about more of an industry role. Maybe they want to work in a business capacity rather than a legal capacity. So that's what we would think of as a non-practicing role. Or perhaps they're looking to work in risk or compliance or in government. So in roles where they would be using their legal skills and knowledge, but not as a practicing lawyer, in something that is law adjacent, we might say. Other times, and sorry, I should continue there. Sometimes people get into those non-practicing roles. They're very happy. with that and they stay in that long term. Other times people will do that for a period of time and then they'll decide, you know what, this has been great, but I'm ready to go the practicing route. Perhaps even because they might see opportunities within their own industry or within their own organization to be a practicing lawyer in a related field. Other times we will see people who come to Canada and let's say perhaps your English language proficiency is not as high as it needs to be to work in the legal field yet here in Canada. Or perhaps they are more recent graduates who don't have a lot of experience and want to spend a little bit of time thinking about where they want to be longer term. Or perhaps there are financial considerations where you are simply thinking about you need to make some money, you may need to support a family. And so, you know, doing accreditation or doing a longer educational program or doing a longer job search isn't maybe an option right now. So you're going to look for a job that you can do that will support you while you think about those longer term goals. These are all sort of equally valid and likely kinds of scenarios that we see with people who are internationally trained lawyers coming into the market. And there are different pathways for everyone. So it's important to remember that this isn't a one-size-fits-all process. Okay, so let's talk first about accreditation. And I know there were a couple of questions in the Q&A during the previous session. So what we're talking about today are people who already have a law degree from outside Canada. So if you aren't yet a law graduate or lawyer, if you want to become a lawyer in Canada, then you do need to go to law school first. So you would need to either do a JD or LLB degree in Canada, or you'd need to do an equivalent degree outside of Canada and then go through this accreditation process that I'm about to talk about. But let's assume that you do already have a law degree, or you're maybe close to finishing your law degree and thinking about relocating to Canada. And so what happens if you have a law degree from outside Canada is that in order to become a practicing lawyer in any of the common law provinces or territories, so everywhere in Canada other than Quebec, the body that you apply to is called the Ncaa, the National Committee on Accreditation. And they have quite a nice, clear, comprehensive website where you can go and apply for accreditation. Typically, they are looking for information about your law degree, any information about whether you're licensed to practice in other jurisdictions. They're looking for some information about your professional experience and so on. And in most cases, it's only your out of Canada experience that is relevant to that assessment. I know there was a question in the previous presentation about paralegal qualifications here in Canada. Those can be relevant if you're coming from a civil law jurisdiction. That can be relevant to your assessment, but it really, all of this depends very much on the individual. What I will say is that the Ncaa has a very good self-assessment tool on the website that will give you a sense for what your assessment might look like and what you might need to do. And they also have a policy that deals with how they assess candidates. But what I am going to do is give you an overview of the main categories of candidates we see coming through the process and what's required. Okay, and so what the Ncaa does is they assess you. Once you complete their requirements, you get what's called a certificate of qualification. And that makes you equivalent from a regulatory standpoint to someone who's graduated from a Canadian common law degree program, such as a JD or LLB from a Canadian law school. And at that point, you can become licensed to practice law through the process of one of the common law societies in Canada. And just to illustrate for you, in Ontario, where we're located, it's the Law Society of Ontario. And so the licensing process you would do after your NCA process involves 2 licensing exams, and it also involves what's called experiential education or experiential training. And that period of experiential training is currently 8 months. It may go back to 10 months. It's been shortened because of the pandemic. And most candidates are required to do that. There is a possibility of being exempted from that requirement if you have law practice experience from another common law country, somewhere like England, India, Nigeria, Australia, the US, jurisdictions that are common law in nature. So the NCA process, in terms of thinking about wanting to become a practicing lawyer, the NCA process comes first, and then you do licensing in one of the provinces or territories that's common law. So again, anywhere other than Quebec. So what does the NCA process look like for different categories of people? Well, there are kind of, broadly speaking, 3 main categories of types of candidates. We would see civil law candidates, common law in-person graduates, and common law distance education graduates. Now, there are some other permutations and combinations that are a bit less frequent, but most people fall generally into one of these categories. So let's say you are a lawyer from a civil law country, somewhere like a country in Latin America or the Middle East or most of Europe. In fact, a lot of the world is civil law. If you're civil law trained, in order to do the NCA process, you do have to, it will require you to go back to school here in Canada for at least a period of time, because the NCA process contemplates that people from civil law jurisdictions are trained in a very different way. And so they want you to take at least some courses in a common law school setting so that you get some formal training in that area. And basically, civil law candidates have to do about 8 or 9 subjects as part of their assessment, and they have to do usually at least 4 of those in a law school. And then they're allowed to potentially write some challenge exams with the regulator for the remaining subjects if they wish. So very, very often we see people from civil law jurisdictions wanting to do an LLM program or wanting to do something like single course enrollment to try to accumulate those subjects that they need for their NCA requirements. And so if you're from a civil law country, you can potentially accomplish the NCA process in about a year if you were to do a program where you got access to all of your subjects. Now let's think next about people from common law jurisdictions who have done their previous law degree through in-person study. So typically, let's say candidates coming from India would often have done a 5-year combined BA LLB. People from the UK might have done a 3-year LLB. Very often those are in-person study programs. If you have one of those degrees, the assessment looks quite different from somebody from a civil law country. So for common law candidates, you usually can get an NCA assessment that says, okay, you need to do this many subjects as part of your accreditation requirement. And usually you have the option to either write challenge exams in those subjects with the regulator, or you can take courses at a Canadian law school. So you do have more flexibility if you're coming from that common law in-person background. And the minimum number of subjects that's required for accreditation for somebody from a common law jurisdiction is 6. 5 Canadian substantive subjects plus legal research and writing. And that number can increase depending on a number of factors, including the length of your law degree, whether you have a previous university degree before you went to law school, your academic performance in your law degree, and so on. So certainly more flexibility in terms of options if you're coming from a common law in-person study background. Now, the third category that, again, we see a fair number of candidates from would be common law distance education, or basically any program that you've done for law school where you had less than 1 year of in-person study. So we see a lot of people coming from law schools like the one at the University of London, which is a distance education model. And if you have a distance education degree, somewhat like a civil law candidate, you do have to go back to school in Canada. And in most cases, you need at least 1 year of in-person study here in Canada. So these candidates, if you're looking to get accredited, typically you do need to get access to an academic program here in Canada. So as I've mentioned, some candidates are going to have options to complete their Ncaa requirements. They might have the option of doing exams or taking courses, whereas others do need to get access to an educational program or courses in the subjects that are required, and that's governed by what your Ncaa assessment says. Now, once you get your Ncaa assessment, they will give you 5 years to complete your requirements. So that's quite a generous amount of time for most candidates. You can get started on that right away. You can wait a bit. You can sort of take your time. So we will often see candidates who are studying either full-time or part-time, and they're either taking courses toward their Ncaa requirements, or they might be doing a program in something else and writing their Ncaa challenge exams concurrently. So it's really up to you how quickly or slowly you want to take on this process. What is important to know is that if you get to the end of the 5 years, the Ncaa will sometimes give extensions, but you need to have made progress on your requirements. Otherwise, you'd have to apply for a new assessment. Okay, and then again, if you are going on to licensing, that would come after completion of the Ncaa process. Okay, program options that you might think about if you're going the accreditation route. One would be an LLM program, and this is a very popular option. There are a number of LLM programs across Canada that give access to the subjects that you need for Ncaa accreditation. There are other LLMs where that's not the primary focus, but you have some access. And so to give you an example from our own context at Osgoode PD, we have a professional LLM. The professional LLM has about 15 different specializations. One of those specializations is called Canadian Common Law, and that's one that would give students access to all of the required subject options that exist within the Ncaa process. And so depending on what a student needs to do to satisfy their Ncaa requirements, they can do all or most or some of the Ncaa requirements within the program. If a student were in a different specialization, like for example, taxation law, they would still have access to take some Ncaa subjects within that program. So again, it sort of depends how many Ncaa requirements you have, whether you're required to take your subjects by courses or whether you have options to take exams as well. Another option is for what we would call Ncaa special students or non-degree options. So many of the JD programs in Canada have programs where they will admit students to take specific courses toward their Ncaa requirements. Osgoode has that option. And in fact, we're offering some extra spaces this year because there are more people coming from distance education backgrounds who need in-person study. We also have single course options in the graduate level where, let's say, you're happy to write some of your Ncaa subjects by challenge exam, but you don't want to do all of them. Perhaps you're really interested in criminal law, to use the example that Michael was talking about earlier. and you really would like to take a course in that area, so that you can really, delve into the issues in Canadian criminal law. So people might choose to take just one course for that reason. We have Ncaa prep supports that are around either through us at Osgoode PD. There are also tutors in the market where you might be looking just for some help with your Ncaa challenge exams. And in other cases, people might need to do language training to improve their comprehension, their speaking skills, their writing skills, either before or during the Ncaa process. And those exist as well, including we have at York University an advanced intensive legal English program. So lots of things that you can look to for support. I know there was a question in the chat earlier about admission to the professional LLM. So I'll talk a little bit about that now. It is sort of under the heading of practical considerations, but certainly every LLM program across Canada is going to be a little bit different in terms of what they're looking for in student profiles and how many students they admit. For the professional LLM at Osgoode, we are typically looking for candidates who have legal work experience. So our rule of thumb would be, we would be looking for about 2 years or more as a minimum of legal work experience, because it is a professional LLM. So as the name suggests, we're bringing in people with professional experience. We want them to be able to have those practical discussions with their classmates. And we do find that people with the experience tend to do better in our program for that reason. Now, that experience can be, it doesn't have to be law practice. It can be other kinds of relevant work experience. If you are a fresh graduate, it's not to say you can't apply, you certainly can. We just admit fewer fresh graduates, and we would be looking at other factors in the application. So for example, your academic performance. And I know there was a question as well earlier about what we're looking for in terms of academic performance. Our grade point average benchmark is a B or better. And we do take into account, obviously, if you have lots of experience, so 5 years or more of experience, we're not going to be looking as closely at the grades. If you're a more recent graduate, the grades are a little bit more important in the process of admission, because we're looking at those to try to benchmark what your performance might be in your graduate program with us. So obviously, if you graduated a year or two ago, then those grades we would assume are fairly reflective of your current academic ability. You don't have to worry about submitting to us any kind of assessment of your grades. We do that ourselves, and we're familiar with different grading profiles in different countries around the world. So never fear, there is not many countries around the world where we haven't seen applicants before. So we're pretty familiar with those factors in admission. And I would definitely recommend, I'm going to leave you with the contact information again at the end, if you're really seriously interested in one of our programs, that you go to one of our information sessions, because we get into those details a lot more in terms of what we're looking for in admissions. Okay, let's move on next to education options for those who might be thinking about a non-practicing role. So the first question would be, are you continuing in an area that's related to what you've done in the past, or are you switching to something new? So let me give you an example. So let's think about someone who may have worked in banking in another jurisdiction, and they want to work in banking here in Canada. You're going to have some really good industry knowledge, but there might be regulations here, for example, or there might be areas within the banking sector where there's more demand. So for example, we've had quite a lot of our alumni go into regulatory compliance, anti-money laundering, those kinds of areas in the last number of years. And so, you know, having familiarity with the area, but then getting some specialized Canadian and current knowledge, as well as a network in that area through taking courses or doing a certificate or an LLM can be very helpful. Let's say you want to switch fields, and the example I really like is we have a wellness counselor. She's on leave right now, but she'll be coming back in the fall, who is a lawyer from a country in Europe. And when she came to Canada, she decided to do something different. And she went back to school and became a qualified social worker, and so works as a wellness counselor with lawyers, helping them with mental health challenges and stress. And so, you know, these are all legitimate options. And so some of you may have ideas already in terms of what you want to do. Some of you may be thinking about doing this research when you get here. And obviously, different kinds of programs might work better depending on whether you're staying in something that's familiar or changing. So options that are out there: LLM degree programs that are specialized. So just a few of the specializations, for example, that we have in the professional LLM: tax, financial law, health law, labor and employment, privacy and cybersecurity, so many different areas of specialization. And in the professional LLM, we have students who are law graduates, and we also have students who are not law graduates, who are professionals working in those areas. So you do get sort of an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary perspective in the classes, and that helps with networking as well. So you want to look at those factors when you're looking at education options. Single courses, if you're just looking for a slice of information. There was a question in the Q&A previously about paralegal programs. So that's one way of working in a non-law practice capacity. Law clerk programs, immigration consultant programs, or sometimes you might want you know, something else. We see people doing things in business topics and others. So colleges or institutes often are offering quite practical programs that, again, can either give you a longer term career or sometimes a temporary career. We see a lot of students coming to us for Ncaa accreditation support after they have done a paralegal program and worked as a paralegal for a number of years in Canada. So that's a fairly common pathway. Or finally, things like certificate programs that, again, are even more specific and might be very practical. So for example, here at Osgoode PD, one of the very popular certificate programs we run is entertainment law. Let's say you're somebody who worked in that field in another country and you want to translate that experience to the Canadian context. You might be looking for a very, very specific program to do that. Okay, finally, we'll look at quick entry options. So let's say you're looking for a job quickly, not necessarily a law practice or a non-practicing legal job, but you want to work as a legal assistant in a law firm. You want to perhaps work in a corporation or a bank in a more administrative capacity. You may still be looking at needing to improve language proficiency or writing skill for the Canadian market. So language and writing programs can be very helpful for that. And again, single courses or certificates or continuing ed programs that often are, again, highly practical or very specific in terms of the information that you're getting, and often not high cost as well, or long in duration. So these can be quick ways to boost skills or knowledge in order to support a job search or to support furthering the skills so that you can perhaps move either within your organization or to different kinds of roles. So finally, practical considerations. So cost is a big one. if the money isn't there, the budget isn't there to pay for something, then that may be something that you're looking at later on. Obviously, degree programs are often going to be the big ticket items. Now, they often also do have financing options available in terms of lines of credit may be available. If you have domestic status, permanent status here in Canada already, you may be able to access government student loans or bursaries. There are a number of different microfinancing, micro-lending organizations out there like Windmill Microlending that will give loans to people who are looking to become accredited. There are organizations like Empower Financial, which is an organization that gives loans and sometimes grants as well to international students. So if you are looking at doing a degree program, often there's quite a bit of research to do in terms of where that funding, those loans and so on may be available from. Length would be another practical consideration. So degree programs are often going to be 1 or 2 years in length if you're looking at LLMs, for example. So you want to think about what your time horizon is, how that relates to an accreditation plan if you have one, for example, whereas some of the more specific programs like certificates might be only a few days or a number of days over a couple of months in length, so much shorter. Time commitment. Some programs have only full-time options. Others have part-time options. We're very happy in the professional LLM to have lots and lots of part-time options because we know that many students who are experienced professionals, they tend to have family or other obligations, and it's often very, very helpful actually to people's longer-term success if they're working. Developing those networks, developing the skills and knowledge, and may look at studying part-time. So you'll want to look at whether those options are available. Other times people want to do a full-time program and get it finished more quickly. Next thing would be, what credential are you getting and does that matter to you? A lot of times we see students who say, well, I've always really wanted to do graduate study. I'd love to get an LLM, so I'm going to go that route so that I can have the credential. In other circumstances, it's the knowledge or the skills that you're getting that are more important. So non-degree or non-credit programs may be suitable. And then finally, what are you getting? So, we started with budget and money, and we're ending with sort of the value proposition. So you'll want to look at, if I'm doing a non-credit or non-degree program, then typically what I'm getting is I'm just getting the training and the substantive knowledge. There often are not other services provided. Whereas if you're looking at a degree program, such as an LLM, there will often be other things included. And that would be one thing you'd want to look at when you're researching programs. So for example, in the professional LLM that we offer, we have a wellness counselor, we have academic support, we have career development, as well as lots of extracurricular and other things connected with the university. So you'll want to look at what's available and then judge, is that something I'm going to use? Is that something I would find valuable? And so that takes me to the end of my formal presentation. I know I've given you a lot to think about, but again, I definitely recommend signing up for one of our Q&A sessions or one of our information sessions if you're interested in what we do. If you wanted a more in-depth session on the accreditation process, one of our philosophies at Osgoode PD is to be a source of information about the process for internationally trained lawyers, because we know it can be complicated and it can be a little bit isolating as well. And so we're happy to hear from you if we can offer support. We are going into our 10th year of running the professional LLM in Canadian common law. So we've seen many, many hundreds of internationally trained lawyers in our program. And I'll also give a shout out to Michael, who not only did a great presentation today, but runs our Osgoode's Internationally Trained Lawyer Day every year. That typically comes up in May, so you'd be waiting a while for next year, but please do join us if you want to create more of that community.
Megan, thank you very much. That was fantastic and much appreciated. A few questions before we wrap up. Number one, is working throughout my graduation considered for the last 2 years a requirement? Would volunteering count towards this, as I cannot work?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that. I'm going to assume that the question is geared toward thinking about admission requirements for our program. So I mentioned the fact that we look for people who have had relevant work experience. We don't care whether you were paid enough or not for that experience. What matters to us is the skills and knowledge that you have. So volunteer positions can often be very meaningful in terms of skill and knowledge development. So if you've been doing a volunteer position while you were studying, that's certainly something we would look at.
Thank you. One more. You've answered actually quite a few in your presentation, so thank you. As an internationally trained lawyer coming to Canada and have completed my Ncaa assessment and passed exams, how can I continue the process? Can I apply for internships prior to landing? Is there something I should be doing while waiting?
Right. Okay. And sorry, Sanjay, did the person say they've completed all of their Ncaa exams?
Correct. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. So that's great. So that part is finished. So someone in that situation, what they would want to do, first of all, is decide in which province do they want to work as a lawyer. They could, so this is a situation where there's a bit of a crossroads in the sense that that person could look for non-practicing jobs and do that for a period of time before becoming licensed. But if they do want to go the lawyer licensing route right away, let's say they were deciding to come to Ontario, they would want to look at the licensing process policies and timelines. They would need to determine whether they need to complete experiential training. So people may remember I was talking about that being a requirement. If there's somebody who is a practicing lawyer from a common law jurisdiction, they may not need to do that. So there are a number of different factors. I guess the answer is always that you can always be applying for jobs. It's just a matter of which category of job you would be applying for at different times. Because if you do need to do experiential training, there's a fairly structured recruitment process for that often happens in advance. Whereas if the person were looking at doing a non-practicing job, either temporarily or permanently, then they can apply for that at any time. So yes, definitely apply, but what for is going to depend on where in the sort of licensing cycle period we are. Okay.
And I think you hit on the button. It's the answer is customized based on where you're actually looking to apply. So
exactly.
Understood. I hope that explains it.
Yeah, and I will give a shout out for people who are very new to Canada or not here yet. There are some really good organizations founded by internationally trained lawyers that I recommend people join, just to have that network of other people who either are in the process or have been through it. There is the one that a couple that we're involved in, ITL Ncaa Networks, Global Lawyers of Canada, the Ncaa Network. There are a number of different ones, and just if people just Google or if they check our Internationally Trained Lawyers Day page, they'll see a listing of some of those organizations. Michael is involved on the advisory board of one of them as well, and those are really good networks to join and get a bit of intel into how the process works.
You may have partially answered the last question. Question is there a specific course to tune up my writing skills? I'm an international lawyer.
Right. So There are many options, I guess, would be the answer. And I think, I am sort of partial to the ones that we run, of course. And I think for lawyers, what's important, well, first of all, you'd have to gauge what your current level is, because you might benefit from something that's more general in nature if you're at sort of a lower proficiency level right now. If your proficiency level is quite high, you would want to look for things that are specific to legal writing, because Canadian legal writing style is different from even US legal writing style, or UK or India or Nigeria. Even if we're talking about jurisdictions where English is used, there are stylistic and differences in approach in how we write. So certainly my favorite programs would be Advanced Intensive Legal English that we run through the York University English Language Institute. We also have a really good graduate diploma in Foundations of Canadian Law at Osgoode PD, where we spend a lot of time on writing skills with the students. So those would be two options that are really law focused.
Yeah.
If people are looking for something else general, there are a number of really good programs at the different colleges in Canada, where you can just work on the general writing style skills.
Very helpful. Megan, thank you very much. Sincerely appreciate you being here. On behalf of Canadian Immigrant Magazine, thank you to you and Michael. And now I'd like to thank you so much to everyone for attending our web conference series in partnership with ACCESS Employment and sponsored by Osgoode Professional Development. Special thanks, as mentioned, to Megan and Michael for joining us today and sharing their skills, experience, and expertise with everyone. If you missed anything on this web conference, this will be posted on our website, canadianimmigrant.ca, for you to rewatch at any moment. And if you have any questions, Megan was kind enough to share her contact details. So if you have questions, you can directly reach out to their team. And for any generic questions, you can feel free to email info@canadianimmigrant.ca. Once again, thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful and pleasant afternoon, morning, evening. Enjoy.
Thank you, everyone.